Kelly Ripa didn't hold back while sharing her unfiltered thoughts on Botox, warning young fans they may regret getting work done on their faces too soon. During the Wednesday, February 18th episode of Live with Kelly and Mark, Ripa and her husband, Mark Consuelos, kicked off a conversation about aging and whether older adults are better at reading facial expressions than younger people. We're not quite there yet. We're not grannies or grandfathers yet, but older people are better at reading people's facial expressions than younger people, Consuelos said while reading off a sheet of paper. That's true. Because kids these days are just doing this, the Riverdale actor added while pretending to stare into a phone. How could they read facial expressions if it's not on TikTok or Instagram? He snubbed. Ripa didn't disagree, joking, I haven't seen a facial expression on a young person in quite some time. It's usually just the face in the phone. Consuelos continued the debate, noting, they say that's because older adults can tap into life experiences. No, I don't think that's it. I think that's because we didn't have phones. We weren't born into the phones. A world of technology. Yeah, we weren't connected to things like that, Ripa admitted. But the conversation quickly took a sharper turn when Ripa brought up cosmetic procedures. Kelly Ripa had always been capable of doing two things at once, delivering a quick, gleaming joke and dropping something unexpectedly sincere right after. Viewers loved her for that, the blistering comedic timing and the soft vulnerability that peeked through when the cameras stopped rolling. It was why, on a Wednesday in February, when a lighthearted discussion about phones and facial expressions on Live with Kelly and Mark pivoted into a blunt warning about cosmetic procedures, the exchange landed like a splash of cold water across the culture of youth and beauty. The segment began as a familiar dance. Mark Consuelos read a small paper card, one of those research snips they kept in the queue, and declared, with a half-smile, that older adults were better at reading facial expressions than younger people. It was the kind of broad, slightly self-congratulatory opener that let both hosts riff. Kelly and Mark parried jokes about never being grannies, about how they themselves were not old enough to deserve the full reverence of experience, and then they landed, naturally, on the topic of screens. Kids these days are just doing this, Mark mimed, eyes locked on an imaginary phone. Kelly laughed, nudging him. I haven't seen a facial expression on a young person in quite some time. It's usually just the face in the phone. The studio chuckled. The audience lived those gestures, the half lean to catch a screen, the brow smooth for a selfie, the tiny sculpted smile for a story, and the conversation felt familiar and benign, a cultural commentary in miniature. Then Kelly, who had been listening like someone who keeps notes on ordinary things and files them away for later use, tilted her head and added a line that pulled the room taut. You know what I worry about, though, she said. Young people getting Botox. It was a throwaway line on its face, but Kelly didn't let it be. The phrase rolled back across the studio and somehow gathered gravity. She dove in, the way she sometimes dug into a dish she loved, with full attention. You're going to make yourself look older, Kelly told the camera and, by extension, the millions of young people who watched online clips later. She wasn't saying this as some elder scolding from a soapbox. There was practical, hard-earned experience in her tone, an awareness of how faces age, how expressions change over time, and how the very interventions meant to erase the small signatures of time can, if used too soon or without moderation, trade one set of marks for another. Mark grinned, playing foil to her seriousness. We didn't have phones, he said, half sincere, half mocking. We weren't born into the phones. They moved through the familiar choreography of banter, a jab here, an affectionate tease there, but Kelly returned to the point with measured clarity. It wasn't about shaming choices or policing anyone's body. It was a caution offered from a place of long observation about faces, expressions, and the quiet language people carry across years. She spoke of the elasticity of skin and the way a face that moves with emotion keeps a certain kind of life. When you remove everything that moves, you remove the thing that tells your story, she said. As a piece of television, that moment was short, 30, 40 seconds of a larger show, but as a cultural nudge, it landed differently. The clip spread across feeds because it contained something that resonated, a vulnerability amid the ranks of influencer-perfect profiles, a reminder that choices made in youth ripple across decades. And of course, because Kelly is a performer who understands storytelling, she framed her warning not as an ironclad dictum, but as an invitation to think about long games rather than short-term fixes. After the segment aired, the social media aftermath followed its usual trajectory. Some applauded the warning, thanking Kelly for speaking plainly. Some pushed back, saying a person's body is their own and no celebrity should weigh on the decisions of another. Others turned it into a conversation far broader than Botox, about beauty standards, about the pressure to look forever young on platforms where curated moments are currency. Kelly and Mark's exchange became a kind of public teaching moment, not a lecture from atop a pedestal, but a double act that mixed humor with a pointed question. What are you trying to preserve, and when do early alterations risk undermining the thing you love? Kelly's argument was simple and humane. Movement, she suggested, is proof of life on the face. The unconscious little contractions when someone smiles, the crow's feet that form because a person has laughed at something absurdly funny, the faint crease between brows when someone really concentrates, these are the markers of a life lived. Injecting botulinum toxin to smooth a brow that has not yet earned its lines might remove the capacity for those subtle movements later, and the result, paradoxically, can be a cadaverous or aged look precisely because the face loses dynamic animation. Kelly's pitch was rooted in a long view of aesthetics, not zero lines, but expressive, lived-in faces. It's an argument that lives in the borderland between science and taste, but Kelly never pretended to be a medical authority. Instead, she weighed the cultural and emotional costs. She reminded young fans, gently but firmly, that the impulse to fix a fleeting insecurity could become a long-term aesthetic debt. When you start tinkering when you're 19 or 20, it's not always reversible, she warned. And you might regret losing things you didn't know you loved yet. She punctuated her caution with examples from the industry, colleagues whose features had been altered over the years, some of whom she admired and others whose transformations she felt had eroded the human expressiveness that once made them interesting. There was no schadenfreude in her tone. The narrative was always about preservation and informed choice. What made the moment compelling was Kelly's refusal to moralize. She didn't condemn cosmetic procedures outright. Instead, she asked for a pause, a moment of reflection before a permanent alteration. She spoke to the young women and men who had grown up watching curated perfection on Instagram and TikTok, platforms that demand a constant visual performance. She asked them softly to consider what they would want their faces to say in 30 years. Across feeds and comment threads, people extricated different things from the clip. Some teenagers said Kelly was out of touch with their realities, that the pressure to conform to certain beauty metrics pushes them toward quick fixes. Others, older or more reflective, wrote about the relief they felt hearing a public figure tell them to slow down. It's not just about lines, one user wrote. It's about having something real left when you look back at old photos. Kelly's observations slipped easily into broader conversations about mental health and identity. Many young people felt that altering their appearance was a form of taking control, an act of agency. That perspective is valid and important. Autonomy over one's body is a cornerstone of dignity. Kelly's plea did not deny that. Rather, she asked that choices be made with information and with future self in mind. Agency without foresight is still agency, she said. But agency with information is freedom. On morning shows and in think pieces that followed, commentators parsed the exchange. Some took Kelly's words as a rallying cry for more honest conversations between dermatologists, plastic surgeons, and young patients. Others took it as a cultural critique, a recognition that social media economies commodify youthful perfection and pressure consumers to trade their natural timeline for an edited one. Behind the scenes, the hosts returned to the comfortable rhythm of their partnership. Their banter resumed. The show moved on to other topics. But the segment had shifted something subtly on stage. It forced a mainstream platform to engage with the ethics of beauty culture in a way that felt immediate and personal.